Botswana's Court of Appeal has today begun hearing a government attempt to overturn a landmark ruling that decriminalized homosexuality. The country's High Court in 2019 ruled in favor of campaigners seeking to strike down prison sentences for same-sex relationships, declaring them unconstitutional. But government now wants the ruling overturned as it believes that the courts have no jurisdiction to decriminalize homosexuality.
A win out of the Court of Appeal is an affirmation of the fact that Botswana has indeed moved 20 steps ahead, not only of the former self of Botswana, but ahead of many other parts of the continent that still criminalize consensual adult same-sex and same-gender activity.
I do believe that protecting human rights for the LGBTIQ community is very pivotal in Botswana, and it is quite important that we recognize that every human being has got the right to equality, because equality equals dignity, and it gives each individual their right to understanding that they are a part of the bigger society.
Because it hinges on dignity, the right to privacy, as well as humanity at its best, the right to choice, the right to live as who you are and who you choose to be. So that is how important it is. I find that LGBTI persons have been excluded from all society at all levels, and it continues to be a hindrance in terms of enjoyment of fundamental human rights, and that's how important it is.
Right, let's talk on this further now, and I'm joined by a commissioner at the Commission for Gender Equity, that is Busisiwe Deyi, and gender activist and founder of the National Men's Forum, Mbuyiselo Botha. Good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time and joining us today here on In Focus. So the government of Botswana wanting this particular ruling overturned because they believe the courts overstepped their jurisdiction. This should be a matter for Parliament to decide. Botha, what do you think is behind this challenge by the government of Botswana?
Well, I think for me, Thabo, and good evening, and thank you for inviting me. I think for me, it's actually representing what the people of Botswana, one would think that the Parliament seeks to appease. That when Thabo, that there are these ingrained ideas about LGBTIQ. So what this seeks to do is to in fact say that we are responding to what the Botswana citizens seeks to achieve, which is that being gay, lesbian, intersex is still not something that is acceptable in the community. So for me, Thabo, it goes to the heart of what what the Parliament seeks to be endorsing in saying that we are not a society that is forward-looking.
Yeah. Busisiwe, the Botswana government missed an opportunity here to be forward-looking?
Well, I think that it's missing an opportunity to be forward-looking, but also it's missing an opportunity to really interrogate where the history of these laws and the central anti-blackness that informs these laws. You will note, Thabo, that a lot of these laws around public indecency, around sex against the order of nature, are rooted in colonial mandates, for lack of a better word, to control indigenous populations and black indigenous populations within, settler colonial states, such as Botswana, such as South Africa as well. So the historical location of these laws, and which they failed to recognize, was in regulating black people, black communities, and black bodies. Because you'll remember, Thabo, that black bodies were constructed through colonialism as fundamentally sinful, as fundamentally dirty, as fundamentally requiring the law to cleanse that sin and that unhygienist. So I think it's lack to be forward-looking, but also it's fundamentally a lack to really interrogate the colonial history of these laws.
Yeah. Do they have grounds to appeal this? I mean, the Attorney General, Abraham Kitsabi, saying that they believe that the courts erred, but obviously not giving the details of their grounds to appeal. Do they have any grounds to appeal this particular ruling?
Well, their appeal is based on, a legal principle called separation of powers. The idea that there should be certain matters around governance that are reserved for one arm of government, and that the courts, because the courts are not elected democratically, they do not have the legitimacy to make judgments on particular issues. This is often used, even in South African jurisprudence, by governments to escape scrutiny in some of the decisions. But what is important to note is that this citizenry, this imagined citizenry that they think they represent, and the morals that they assign to the citizenry, is based on or necessarily requires that gay and lesbian and trans and intersex Botswanian citizens, are not themselves citizens, but rather some sort of shadow citizenry that needs to be hidden from participating fully in Tswana society.
Yeah. There are some, of course, other countries, including Kenya, which you've already mentioned, where the High Court upheld its law banning gay sex, keeping same-sex relationships punishable by 14 years in jail, and drawing strong criticism from the United Nations and other right activists. Dr. Botha, should lawmakers and particularly governments be changing their thinking around these laws in line with the change in society and the acceptance in society of, I suppose, broader sexual orientation?
Oh, for sure, Thabo. Just before I answer a question, recently you were mentioning, other countries. Recently Ghana has also insisted with, in fact, increasing the sentence of when you are found to be in a gay or same-sex relationship. But to come back to your question, Thabo, I think it's important that governments, initially I mentioned the issue of forward-looking, but I want to rephrase by saying that governments have to be in tune with what societies are saying or clamoring for, and them as politicians, it's important for them to, in fact, be in tune with, other than enacting laws or creating laws, but also to say that how do we make sure that communities, how do we make sure that we deal with inequalities? How do we make sure that we frame our thinking within the human rights framework? So, Thabo, all of these things are in fact important for all of us to do, because look, politicians, by the way, they are part and parcel of communities. You don't find, they don't fall from heaven. You don't find them as people who are ready-made. A lot of them, they in some instances, they espouse what they think that communities want to hear. So it's important that this type or level of education, level of engagement, cajoling, that it involves them too. We should not separate them and think of them as an island sufficient unto themselves, because in doing so, we're giving them some powers that some mystic powers, if you like. Yeah.
The lawyer appearing for government saying this is a policy matter, this can only be assessed by parliament. But he bluntly told the court sitting in Gaborone that if gay rights were unconstitutional in the past, they remain unconstitutional today. What does that signal, I suppose, about the thinking in that country? Busisiwe?
Well, I find it very interesting, because the past is not this uniform, singularly agreed concept, right? The past is informed by colonialism. The past is informed by anti-blackness. And we have, I hope, the Tswana government would understand that it has moved to remove laws that were in the statute books that criminalized particular kinds of ownership of property, ownership of business by Black people in the country that were privileged through and enacted through colonialism. So there is this disjuncture between how we understand the past with certain ideas and being able to say, look, this anti-blackness is not part and parcel of our future. But when it comes to topics such as LGBTI rights, which have become moralized, all of a sudden the past becomes this cleansed, pure concept that was always fundamentally correct, and always the legislatures of the past had good judgment and understood the needs and the morals of a future citizenry, imagined as it may be. So I think it's quite contradictory. I think that taking this argument to its fullest extent results in all kinds of absurdities, because there are ways in which we can look at the past and past laws in Botswana's history and really see how that has been changed through a legislative enactment, because there was a recognition of the need to progress. But when it comes to issues around LGBTI rights and equality of recognition, this imagined past becomes something that's untainted and perfect, and in fact used to legitimate and justify the continued oppression of LGBTI communities.
Busisiwe Deyi, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, as well as Mbuyiselo Botha for this conversation tonight.